A stranger saved me from my wife's staged accident plot. She shouted, "Get off the bus right now, or you'll disappear." I got off instantly, but when I turned back, I froze in horror. I was going to the farm with my wife on the bus when I heard a warning from a lady who whispered near my ear, "Get off right now, otherwise you'll disappear." I felt a shiver run down my spine. My heart stopped for a second. I looked at Lilia, my wife, who was sitting next to me staring out the window, completely oblivious to what had just happened. She hadn't noticed anything. I got off the bus instantly. I don't know what prompted me to do it. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the tone of urgency in that woman's voice, but something inside me screamed that I had to get out of there, that I had to get off. The bus had already stopped at an intermediate stop. I grabbed my backpack. Lilia looked at me confused. "What are you doing, Sebastian?" she asked. I didn't answer her. I just got up and walked toward the door. I went down the steps, my legs trembling. The bus started again, its tires crunching against the pavement, and then, as I turned to watch it pull away, I was paralyzed with horror. But let me go back a bit. I need to tell you how I got to that moment, how I ended up on that bus, how a simple warning from a stranger saved my life. Because none of this makes sense if you don't understand what happened before, if you don't know who I was, who she was, and why that trip to the farm had become so important to Lilia in recent weeks. My name's Sebastian. I'm 48 years old. I work in an accounting office in the city, a normal, routine life without great emotions. I've been married to Lilia for 6 years. She's 42. She's a determined, organized, practical woman. She's not one to show much affection, but she's always been there when I've needed her. We met at a very dark time in my life. I had just lost my first wife, Elena, in a car accident. It was devastating. Elena and I were together for 15 years. She was the love of my life. When she died, I felt my world collapse. I didn't know how to move on. I sank into a deep depression. I stopped going out. I stopped eating well. I could barely get out of bed to go to work. My friends tried to help me, but I pushed them away. I didn't want company. I didn't want comfort. I just wanted the pain to disappear. It was then that Lilia appeared. A distant cousin introduced her to me at a family gathering I almost didn't go to. Lilia was her friend. She greeted me kindly. Nothing forced, just a casual conversation. She asked me how I was. I told her the truth, that I wasn't well, that every day was a struggle. She listened without judging me, without giving me empty advice. She just listened, and that was enough. After that meeting, she started visiting me, first once a week, then twice. She'd bring me homemade food, help me tidy the house, keep me company while I watched TV in silence. We didn't talk much, but her presence was comforting. It made me feel like I wasn't completely alone in the world. Little by little, I started to depend on her, to need those visits, to wait for her to arrive, and without realizing it, something changed between us. She stopped being just a friend. She became something more. 2 years after meeting, I proposed to her. It was a quick decision, maybe too quick, but at that moment I felt it was the right thing to do, that she had come to save me, to give me a second chance to be happy. Lilia accepted without hesitation. We got married in a small ceremony, with only a few close relatives. Nothing ostentatious, nothing complicated, just what we both wanted. We moved into the house I had shared with Elena. Lilia had no problem with that. In fact, it was she who suggested we stay there. "It's your home, Sebastian," she told me. "You don't have to abandon it." It seemed like a show of understanding, of maturity. I accepted, and for the first few years, everything worked well. We had a quiet life, without major conflicts, without great passions either, but I didn't care about that. I wasn't looking to relive what I had with Elena. I was just looking for stability, companionship, someone to share everyday life with. But over time, I started to notice changes in Lilia, small changes that at first didn't seem important to me. She started asking a lot of questions about my finances, about the inheritance I had received from my parents. They died 8 years ago, shortly before I met Elena. They left me a farm in the countryside, a property that had been in the family for generations. It was a beautiful place, full of childhood memories, but after my parents passed away, I didn't go back there anymore. It was too painful, too emotionally charged, so I left it abandoned. I only went once a year to check that everything was in order, nothing more. Lilia knew about the existence of that farm. I had told her about it when we started dating, but she never showed much interest until a few months ago. Suddenly, she started asking me how much the property was worth, how many acres it had, if there were any interested buyers, if the papers were in order, if I was the sole heir. At first, I answered naturally. I had nothing to hide. Yes, I was the sole heir. My parents didn't have any more children. The farm was valued at about $350,000 according to the last appraisal I did 3 years ago. It wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't a small amount of money either. Lilia nodded every time I gave her those details. She seemed to make mental notes of everything and then quickly change the subject, but I noticed something in her gaze, an interest that went beyond simple curiosity, a kind of silent obsession that was beginning to grow. 3 months ago, Lilia began to insist that we go to the farm, that it was important that we visit it together, that maybe we could sell it and use that money to do something productive, travel, invest, secure a future. Her arguments made sense. I wasn't young anymore. I was 48 years old. I wasn't going to work my whole life. Having that liquid money would give us peace of mind. So I agreed. I said yes, that we would go. We set several dates, but we always ended up canceling. Me because of work, her because she said she didn't feel well, until 2 weeks ago, she came home with the bus tickets in her hand. She had bought them without telling me. It's decided, Sebastian, she told me with a smile. We're going this Saturday, no more excuses. I was surprised by her determination, but I didn't want to argue. I thought that maybe she was right, that it was time to face that place, to make a decision about what to do with the farm. So I accepted, and that Saturday we got on the bus. The trip lasted approximately 4 hours. We left early in the morning. Lilia looked calm, almost relaxed. She was wearing a light green dress and a thin jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked good, different from how I had seen her in recent days. During the weeks leading up to the trip, she had been tense, nervous. Sometimes I found her awake in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling. When I asked her what was wrong, she would tell me she couldn't sleep, that she had a lot on her mind, but she never went into detail. I didn't insist. I thought maybe it was work stress. She worked as an administrative assistant at a logistics company. It wasn't an easy job, so I gave her space. But now on the bus, she seemed like a different person, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. We sat in the middle seats. Lilia chose the window side. I sat on the aisle side. The bus wasn't full. There were about 15 people in total, families, couples, some solo travelers. Everything seemed normal, routine. Lilia took out her phone and started checking something. I tried to start a conversation, but she only responded with monosyllables. She was focused on the screen. Her fingers moved quickly, typing messages. I asked her who she was talking to. She told me it was her sister, that she was just confirming that we would arrive safely. I nodded. I had no reason to doubt her, but there was something in the way she held the phone, tilting it slightly toward her body so I couldn't see the screen, that made me feel uncomfortable. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I decided to look out the window. The scenery began to change. We were leaving the city buildings behind and entering more open areas. Green fields, trees on the sides of the road. The sky was clear. It was a beautiful day, perfect for traveling. I closed my eyes for a moment trying to relax, but my mind kept racing. I thought about the farm, about my parents, about all the times I played there as a child, about the afternoons I spent with my father fixing fences, about the meals my mother prepared in the big kitchen of the main house. They were beautiful memories, but also painful because I knew that those people were gone, that that place was no longer the same. And now, after so many years of avoiding it, I was finally returning. But I wasn't going alone. I was going with Lilia, and for some reason that didn't give me the peace of mind I expected. I opened my eyes. Lilia was still holding her phone, but she wasn't typing anymore. She was just staring at the screen, as if she was waiting for something, a message, a call. I don't know. I put my hand on her shoulder. She gave a small jump. She turned to me with wide eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, a little louder than normal. I told her nothing, that I just wanted to know if she was okay. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I'm fine, just a little tired." She put her phone in her purse and closed the zipper tightly. Then she looked out the window again. I felt like something wasn't right, but I didn't know what. Half an hour passed, maybe a little more. The bus traveled smoothly along the road. Some passengers were sleeping, others were chatting softly. I tried to concentrate on anything that would distract me. I took out my phone and checked my work emails. Nothing urgent. I answered a couple of messages. Then I opened a news app and started reading random articles, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept going back to Lilia, to her strange behavior, to how much she had insisted on this trip, and then I remembered something that had happened the previous week. It was a Tuesday night. I arrived home earlier than usual. I had a meeting that was canceled at the last minute, so I decided to go back. When I opened the door, I heard voices in the living room. Lilia was talking on the phone. Her tone was low, almost a whisper. I stood at the entrance without making a sound. I didn't want to interrupt, but I couldn't help but listen. "It's almost ready," she said. "Only a few days left. Don't worry, everything will be fine." There was a pause. Then she continued, "He doesn't suspect anything. He trusts me completely." I felt a knot in my stomach. What was she talking about? Who was he? I coughed to let her know I was there. Lilia immediately turned and hung up the phone. She looked at me with a forced smile. "I didn't know you'd be home early," she said. I asked her who she was talking to. She replied that it was her sister, that they were organizing a surprise for their mother's birthday. I believed her. I had no reason not to. But now, sitting on this bus, that conversation returned to my mind with a different weight, with a meaning I hadn't considered before. I glanced at Lilia. She was still staring out the window. Her hands rested on her purse. She held it tightly, as if there was something valuable inside, something she didn't want to lose. I tried to ignore that growing feeling of discomfort in my chest. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was looking for problems where there weren't any, that Lilia was my wife, that she loved me, that she would never hurt me. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, a small voice inside my head kept whispering doubts. The bus made a stop in a small town. Some passengers got off, others got on. Lilia got up and told me she was going to the bathroom. I nodded. She walked toward the back of the bus. I took the opportunity to stretch my legs. I stood up and walked a few steps down the aisle. That's when I saw her, the lady who was sitting right behind us. She was an older woman, about 60 years old. She had short, gray hair and wore glasses. She was dressed in simple clothes, a white blouse and gray pants. When our eyes met, she held my gaze for a few seconds longer than normal. There was something in her eyes, something I couldn't decipher at that moment. Concern, perhaps, or fear. I wasn't sure. I gave her a polite smile and returned to my seat. Lilia returned a few minutes later. She sat down and took out her phone again. This time she didn't write anything. She just stared at the screen with a frown. I asked her if everything was okay. She nodded without looking at me. "Yes, everything's perfect," she replied, but her voice sounded tense. There was a rigidity in her posture that wasn't there before. I looked out the window again. The bus had resumed its journey. We were getting deeper and deeper into the countryside. Houses were becoming scarcer, trees were becoming denser, and I felt that something was about to happen, something that would change everything, but I didn't know what. Another 30 minutes passed. The bus was traveling on a narrower road. Now, trees lined both sides, creating a kind of green tunnel. Sunlight filtered through the branches, casting irregular shadows on the pavement. Lilia was still holding her phone, but now she was just holding it, doing nothing. Her right leg trembled slightly, a nervous movement that I knew well. She did it when she was anxious, when something worried her. I put my hand on her knee to calm her. She flinched and immediately pulled my hand away. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to scare you." She forced a smile. "No, sorry, I'm a little nervous. I haven't slept well these days." I asked her why she hadn't told me. Why hadn't we talked about what was bothering her? She shook her head. "It's nothing important, just work stress." But I knew it wasn't true. There was something else, something she didn't want to share with me. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom. I needed to clear my mind. I walked towards the back of the bus. I passed by the older lady who was sitting behind us. When I reached her, she extended her hand and touched my arm. I stopped. "Excuse me," she said softly. Her voice was trembling but firm. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" I looked at her in surprise. I didn't know her. I had never seen her before, but there was something in her eyes that made me stop, an urgency I couldn't ignore. I looked towards where Lilia was. She was still looking at her phone, distracted. Of course, I replied. What do you need? The lady looked around, making sure no one else was listening. Then she leaned forward and whispered, I have to warn you about something. It's about your wife. I felt my heart race. What about her? I asked, trying to stay calm. The lady looked at me intently. I can't explain it here. It's dangerous, but you need to get off this bus now. Her words chilled me. Why are you saying that? Who are you? She shook her head. I don't have time to explain. Just trust me. If you don't get off this bus, you'll disappear like the others. I didn't understand anything. The others? What was she talking about? I thought maybe she was a confused woman. Maybe she had some mental problem. But her gaze wasn't that of someone who was disoriented. It was the gaze of someone who knew exactly what she was saying. And that scared me. Ma'am, I think there's a misunderstanding, I began to say. But she interrupted me. Your wife isn't who you think she is. She's planning something, and if you get to that farm, you're not coming back. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wanted to tell her she was crazy, that Lilia would never hurt me. But the words didn't come out of my mouth because deep down a part of me began to wonder if maybe there was some truth in what she was saying. I returned to my seat without going to the bathroom. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. I couldn't process what I had just heard. Lilia looked up when I sat down. Are you okay? She asked. You look pale. I nodded without looking at her. Yes, I just feel a little dizzy. Maybe it's the movement of the bus. She touched my forehead with her hand. You don't have a fever. Do you want me to ask the driver to stop? I shook my head. No, I'm fine. I just need to sit for a moment. She nodded and looked out the window again, but I noticed she was watching me out of the corner of her eye, as if she knew something had changed. I started to remember more things. Details I had ignored. A month ago, I found a piece of paper in the pocket of Lilia's jacket while I was taking it to be washed. It was a handwritten note. It said Saturday 15, for hours after leaving, everything ready. It had no signature, no context. When I asked Lilia about it, she told me it was a note she had written to remember a doctor's appointment. But Saturday 15 was today. It was the day we were traveling, and almost 4 hours had passed since we left. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more? I also remembered that 2 weeks ago Lilia had received a call late at night. It was almost 11. She was in bed half asleep when her phone rang. She answered immediately. I heard her voice from the bathroom. Yes, I know. Don't worry. Everything's under control. Then she hung up quickly. When I came out of the bathroom and asked her who it was, she told me it was her boss, that there was a problem at work, but her boss never called her so late, and Lillian didn't seem worried. On the contrary, she seemed relieved, as if something important had been confirmed to her. I looked back. The older lady was still there watching me. When our eyes met, she nodded slightly, as if letting me know that what she had said was serious, that she wasn't lying. I looked at Lilia again. She was writing something on her phone. Her fingers moved quickly. Then she deleted the message before sending it, rewrote it, and deleted it again. She was nervous, that was evident. But why? What was she waiting for? The bus began to slow down. There was a sign on the road indicating a sharp curve. The driver honked to warn other vehicles. Lilia put her phone in her purse. Suddenly, she looked ahead intensely. Her hands gripped the seat. She was breathing faster. Are you okay? I asked her. She nodded without looking at me. Yes, this part of the road just makes me nervous. There are a lot of curves. But there was something else in her expression, something I couldn't identify. Was it fear, anticipation? I didn't know. It was at that moment that the lady leaned forward and whispered near my ear, "Get off right now, otherwise you'll disappear." Her voice was clear, urgent, desperate. I felt my body tense up. I looked at Lilia. She was still looking straight ahead, oblivious to everything. She hadn't heard anything, or maybe she had and was pretending not to. I didn't know. But at that instant, something inside me clicked. All the pieces began to fit together. The strange conversations, the late-night calls, the insistence on this trip, the note in her pocket, the nervousness. Everything made sense, or at least it was starting to. The bus stopped at a small pull-off by the side of the road. It wasn't an official stop, just a place where other buses often stop for passengers to stretch their legs. The driver announced we'd have 5 minutes of rest. Some people got up, others remained seated. Lilia looked at me. "Are you getting off?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, I need some fresh air." She didn't move. "I'll stay here," she said. "I'm tired." I grabbed my backpack. I don't know why I did it. I just felt I had to take it with me. Lilia looked at me strangely. "Why are you taking your backpack?" "We're only going to be here for 5 minutes." I told her I wanted to get a bottle of water. She didn't insist, just nodded and looked out the window again. I walked a few steps away from the bus. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. The lady stayed by my side, watching the vehicle closely. Other passengers had also gotten off. Some smoked, others stretched their legs. Everything seemed normal, routine, but I felt that something terrible was about to happen. I looked towards the window where Lilia was. She had her phone in her hand again. She was typing something quickly. Then she looked up and searched for me with her gaze. When our eyes met, she smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was a tense, forced smile, as if she was acting. I instinctively smiled back, but my stomach twisted. The lady touched my arm. "Don't get back on," she whispered. "Please, trust me." I looked at her. "Who are you? Why are you telling me all this?" She took a deep breath. "My name's Carmina, and I also lost someone because of your wife." Her words took my breath away. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, feeling my legs tremble. Carmina looked around to make sure no one else was nearby. "I can't explain everything here. Too much is at stake. But you need to know that your wife isn't who she says she is. She's done this before twice, and you're going to be the third." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Twice? What did she do twice? Carmina looked at me with eyes full of pain. She killed 2 men, made them disappear, and took everything they had, properties, money, inheritances, everything. I felt the world spin around me. No, that can't be true. Lillian would never do such a thing. She's my wife. I know her. Carmina slowly shook her head. "Do you really know her? Do you know where she was 8 years ago? Do you know who she was before you met her?" I had no answers. I had never asked her much about her past. She had told me that she came from another state, that she had lost contact with most of her family, that she preferred not to talk about it, because it brought back bad memories. And I, absorbed in my own grief over Elena's death, never insisted, never questioned anything. One of those victims, Carmina continued, was my brother. His name was Victor. He was 52 years old. He was a widower. He owned a property in the north. He met a woman named Elsa, or at least that was the name she used. Then they got married quickly, less than a year after meeting. She convinced him to take a trip to his property to sign some papers to put the land in both their names. My brother never returned from that trip. I felt my breathing quicken. What happened to him? Carmina had tears in her eyes. They found his body 3 months later in a ravine near the property. The autopsy determined he died from a blow to the head. The police said it was an accident, that he slipped and fell. But I knew it wasn't true. Victor was a careful man. He knew that land like the back of his hand. He wouldn't have just fallen like that. I started investigating on my own and discovered things the police didn't want to see. Elsa had disappeared. She took everything. The money from my brother's account. The property documents, everything. And when I tried to find her, it was as if she had never existed. There were no records, no photos, nothing. My mind tried to process everything I was hearing. "And how do you know that woman is Lilia?" Carmina took out her phone. "Because I've been following her for 2 years. After what happened to my brother, I became obsessed with finding her. I hired a private investigator. We discovered there was another similar case. A man named Mario, 54 years old, also a widower, on a farm in the south. He met a woman named Georgina. They got married. They took a trip together. He never returned. His body appeared months later in suspicious circumstances, and she disappeared with everything. The pattern was the same, exactly the same." Carmina slid her finger across the phone screen and showed me a photo. It was a blurry image taken from a distance, but you could clearly see a woman with dark hair talking to a man in a cafe. "This is Georgina," Carmina said, or at least that's what she called herself. I looked closely. I enlarged the image. My heart stopped. It was Lilia, there was no doubt. It was my wife. "No, it can't be," I whispered. "There must be a mistake." Carmina slid to another photo. This one showed the same woman, but with shorter hair and dyed a different color. She was with an older man. This is Elsa with my brother Victor. I looked again. It was her. It was Lilia, different names, different appearances, but the same person. She changes identity every time, Carmina explained. She uses fake documents. She approaches widowed men with properties, vulnerable, lonely men who are looking for companionship. She gains their trust, marries them, and then eliminates them when it's time to inherit. I felt my legs give way. I had to lean against a nearby tree to avoid falling. Why didn't you go to the police with this? I asked. I did, Carmina replied bitterly, but they didn't have enough evidence. They said they were just coincidences, that they couldn't accuse someone without solid evidence. So I decided to follow her myself. And when I saw her get on this bus with you, I knew she was about to do it again. I looked towards the bus. Lilia was still sitting and checking her phone. She looked so normal, so harmless. And what was she going to do? How was she going to kill me? Carmina showed me another photo on her phone. It was a screenshot of a message. I intercepted this 2 days ago. It's a conversation between her and an accomplice, someone named Rodrigo. I read the message. My blood ran cold. The brakes are ready. Everything will be fine. 4 hours after departure. Kilometer 85 curve. No one will survive. I felt like I was drowning. The bus brakes. Carmina nodded. They're sabotaged. This bus is going to have an accident on the next sharp curve, and she's going to get off just before it happens, just like she always has. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But everything was starting to make sense. Lilia's insistence on buying the tickets, on choosing this specific bus, on traveling today, her nervousness, the mysterious calls. Everything was part of a plan to kill me. Who's Rodrigo? I asked, my voice breaking. Carmina slid to another photo. It was a man in his 40s, short hair, strong build, and then I recognized him. It was my cousin Rodrigo, my own cousin. I hadn't seen him in years. We had drifted apart after a family argument over my parents' inheritance. He always thought he should have received a share of the farm, that my parents had been unfair by leaving everything to me, but I never imagined he would go so far. What? Was he willing to kill me? They're together, Carmina said. They've been planning this for months, maybe years. Rodrigo knows the farm. He knows the value of the property, and his wife is an expert at manipulating situations to make everything look like an accident. I looked at the bus again. The driver was already calling for passengers to board. The break time was over. Lilia looked for me with her eyes. She gestured for me to get on, but I couldn't move. I couldn't get on that bus knowing what I now knew. Carmina grabbed my arm tightly. Don't get on. Stay here with me. We're going to call the police. We're going to stop this. But I kept looking at Lilia, the woman I had married, the woman I had trusted, the woman who, according to Carmina, was planning to murder me. Lilia got off the bus. She walked towards me with a worried expression. Sebastian, what's wrong? Why aren't you getting on? The driver's about to leave. Her voice sounded genuinely worried, as if she really cared. But now, after what Carmina had shown me, every word she said seemed like a lie, every gesture an act. I don't feel well, I said, looking for an excuse. I think I'll stay here a little longer. Lilia frowned. Stay here, Sebastian? We're in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing here. If you feel bad, we can ask the driver to drive slower, or we can get off at the next town and look for a pharmacy. I shook my head. No, I prefer to stay here. You go on. I'll take another bus later. Her expression changed. The concern turned into something darker, into irritation, into contained panic. Another bus, Sebastian? That doesn't make sense. We've been planning this trip for weeks. You can't just decide to stay here. Her voice rose in tone. Some passengers looked at us curiously. Carmina approached and stood by my side. Lilia looked at her with suspicion. Who are you? She asked harshly. Carmina wasn't intimidated. I'm someone who knows who you really are, Elsa. Or should I say Georgina? Or maybe you prefer me to call you by your real name. Lilia paled. For a second, her mask fell. I saw fear in her eyes, but she quickly composed herself. I don't know what you're talking about. My name's Lilia, and I don't know you. Carmina took out her phone. You don't know me? I'm Victor's sister, the man you killed 8 years ago. Lilia stepped back. She's crazy. I don't know who Victor is. Sebastian, this woman's crazy. Let's go. She grabbed my arm forcefully, too forcefully, but I didn't move. Is it true? I asked. My voice sounded calmer than I felt inside. Did you kill those men? Lilia looked at me with pleading eyes. No, my love, of course not. This woman's making things up. I don't know what she wants from us, but she's lying. But I no longer believed her. Not after seeing the photos. Not after remembering all the signs I had ignored. The bus driver honked his horn. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to travel, please board now. I can't wait any longer. Lilia pulled me harder. Sebastian, please, we have to get on. Don't listen to this woman. She just wants to separate us. But I pulled free from her grip. I'm not getting on that bus. Lilia took a deep breath. I saw her expression change completely. The sweetness disappeared. The concern disappeared. What remained was coldness. Pure coldness. You're an idiot, she said in a flat voice. A sentimental idiot who can't see beyond his own emotions. I should have realized it from the beginning. Her words hit me like a punch. Why? I asked. Why did you do all this? Why did you marry me if you only wanted my money? She laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. Why? Because it's easy. Because men like you are predictable. They're lonely. They're vulnerable. They look for someone to take care of them. And when they find that person, they're willing to give anything, to sign anything, to believe anything. I felt something break inside me. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal. It was the humiliation of having been so blind. Carmina stepped forward. Enough. The police are on their way. I intercepted your messages with Rodrigo. I know what you were planning to do. The bus is sabotaged. You were going to kill him in an accident and make it look like a coincidence. Lilia looked at her with hatred. You have no proof of anything. They're theories, speculations from a bitter woman who can't get over her brother's death. Carmina smiled slightly. I don't have proof. I have screenshots of your conversations. I have records of your fake identities. I have connections between you and the deaths of Victor and Mario. And most importantly, I have an expert checking the brakes of that bus right now. Lilia froze. She looked towards the bus. The driver had gotten off and was talking to a man carrying a toolbox. Carmina continued. I hired a mechanic to travel on this very bus. I asked him to check the brakes during the stop. And guess what he found? The mechanic approached us. He was a man in his 50s with grease-stained overalls. The brakes are completely sabotaged, he said in a serious voice. Someone cut the lines in such a way that they would fail after a specific amount of use. This bus wouldn't have been able to brake on the next sharp curve. All the passengers would have died. The driver, who had heard everything, turned pale. What? The brakes are sabotaged? How's that possible? The mechanic pointed under the bus. Someone had access to the vehicle before it left this morning. This wasn't an accident. It was intentional. Lilia tried to back away, but Carmina grabbed her arm. You're not escaping this time. Not anymore. Lilia struggled. Let me go. You've no right to touch me. But Carmina didn't let go. At that moment, we heard sirens in the distance. 2 police cars approached on the road. Lilia looked at me with a mixture of rage and despair. This is your fault, Sebastian. If you had gotten on the bus as you were supposed to, none of this would have happened. Everything would have been quick, painless, but you had to ruin everything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She spoke of my death as if it were a simple formality, as if my life meant nothing. And Elena? I asked suddenly, did you also have something to do with her death? Lilia remained silent, but the expression on her face gave me the answer. I felt my legs give way. No, I whispered. It can't be. Elena died in a car accident. It was an accident. Lilia smiled bitterly. An accident? Sebastian? Don't be naive. Nothing that has happened in your life in recent years has been an accident. Everything was planned. From the moment your cousin told me about you, I knew you were the perfect target. Widowed, alone, with a considerable inheritance. I just needed Elena to disappear so I could get close to you. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Elena, my Elena, had been killed. It wasn't an accident. It was murder, and also Lilia could rob me. The patrol cars arrived. 2 officers got out and approached us. Carmina quickly explained the situation, showed them the evidence on her phone, and introduced them to the mechanic who had discovered the sabotage. The officers listened carefully. Then they looked at Lilia. Ma'am, we need you to come with us to the station for some questions. Lilia tried to maintain her composure. This is a misunderstanding. I haven't done anything. That woman is making everything up. But one of the officers shook his head. We have an arrest warrant for you under the name of Elsa Morales and also under the name of Georgina Ruiz. We've been investigating you for months. Thanks to Ms. Carmina, we finally have enough to formally charge you. Lilia looked at me one last time. There was no regret in her eyes, just coldness. I hope it's worth it, Sebastian. I hope your pathetic life is worth all this trouble. The officers handcuffed her and led her towards the patrol car. She didn't resist. She knew she was finished. Carmina approached me. Are you okay? I shook my head. No, I'm not okay. I just found out that my wife killed my first wife, that she was planning to kill me too. No, I'm definitely not okay. Carmina put her hand on my shoulder. I know, and I'm very sorry, but at least now you're alive, and she's going to pay for everything she did. I looked at the bus. The passengers were confused, scared. The driver was talking to the officers, trying to understand what had happened, and I just stood there trying to process that my entire life had been a lie. One of the officers approached me. He was a man in his 40s, solidly built with a serious gaze. Sir, I need you to come with us to the station to give your statement. I understand this is difficult for you, but it's important that you tell us everything you know. I nodded without saying anything. I didn't have the strength to speak. I was still processing everything I had discovered. Carmina offered to accompany me. You don't have to go through this alone, she said kindly. I accepted. I didn't know this woman, but she had just saved my life. I owed her everything. We got into one of the patrol cars. Lilia was in the other, staring out the window with an empty expression. As we passed by her vehicle, she turned her head and looked directly into my eyes. There was no guilt there, no remorse, just a kind of cold resignation, as if she had simply failed in a business deal and now had to accept the consequences. The trip to the police station lasted about 20 minutes. Nobody spoke during the journey. I looked out the window, watching the landscape pass without really seeing it. My mind was somewhere else. I thought about Elena, about our 15 years together, about all the times she made me laugh, about the plans we had for the future, plans that were never fulfilled because someone decided that her life was worth less than the money I might have. And then I thought about Lilia, about the 6 years I spent with her, about all the times I felt grateful to have her by my side, about how I thought she was my salvation, when in reality, she was my executioner. I felt like an idiot, a complete idiot who didn't see the signs, who trusted blindly, who gave everything without questioning anything. We arrived at the station. It was a small, 2-story building with concrete walls painted in a base color. They led us to an interrogation room. Carmina sat next to me. The officer who had accompanied us introduced himself formally. My name's Detective Ramirez. I've been investigating this case for 8 months since Ms. Carmina approached us with information about her brother's death. I looked at Carmina. 8 months. She nodded. After the local investigators closed Victor's case as an accident, I didn't give up. I hired a private investigator. He found a pattern. He found the connections between Victor and Mario's deaths, and he found Lilia, or rather, the woman who uses different names to hide her true identity. Detective Ramirez opened a thick folder full of documents. Her real name's Lilia Mendez. She's 38, not 42, as she told you. She has a criminal record for fraud in another state. She served 3 years in prison 12 years ago. After getting out, she disappeared off the radar, changed her identity several times, and started her new modus operandi. I felt my stomach churn. What's her modus operandi exactly? The detective slid several photos across the table. She identifies widowed men with considerable properties or inheritances. She approaches them through mutual acquaintances. She builds a relationship based on trust. She quickly marries them, and then within 2 to 3 years, she orchestrates a fatal accident that appears completely natural. In Victor's case, it was a fall into a ravine. In Mario's case, it was a drowning in a river near his farm. In both cases, she inherited everything, and in both cases, she disappeared shortly after without a trace. I looked at the photos. Victor was a kind-faced man with wrinkles around his eyes that indicated he smiled a lot. Mario was more serious, but also had an air of kindness. Both seemed like good men, men who didn't deserve to die that way. And I was going to be next. And Elena? I asked in a trembling voice. Do you have proof that Lilia was involved in her death? The detective looked at Carmina and then at me. We're investigating that. Your first wife's car accident happened 8 years ago. According to records, a driver lost control of his vehicle and crashed into Elena's car. The driver fled the scene. They never found him. But we have reasons to believe that driver was hired by Lilia, or more specifically, by her accomplice Rodrigo. I felt an anger I had never experienced before. Rodrigo? My cousin Rodrigo. The detective nodded. Rodrigo Medina, your cousin. We've been investigating him too. It seems he's the one who does the dirty work, who sabotages vehicles, who orchestrates the accidents. Lilia is the one who emotionally manipulates the victims. They're a team, and they've been working together for at least 10 years. I couldn't believe it. Rodrigo, my own cousin, someone I played with as a child, someone I shared family dinners with, someone who always resented my parents for leaving the farm to me and not to him. Where's Rodrigo now? I asked. The detective closed the folder. We have an arrest warrant for him. Our officers are on their way to his address right now. He won't escape. Carmina touched my hand. I'm so sorry you have to go through all this. I know how difficult it is to discover that the people you trusted betrayed you in the worst possible way. I looked at her. How did you do it? After losing your brother? After discovering the truth? How did you move on? She sighed. I didn't get over it. I just learned to live with the pain and channel my rage into something productive, into seeking justice, into making sure Lillian couldn't do this to anyone else. That's why I followed her. That's why I got on that bus today, because I knew she was about to do it again, and I wasn't going to allow it. The detective stood up. Mr. Sebastian, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning, from when you met Lilia until today. Every detail is important. Anything you remember could help us strengthen the case against her. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them about how I met Lilia, about how she appeared in my life just when I was most vulnerable, about how she helped me with everything after Elena's death, about our marriage, about her growing interest in the farm, about the strange conversations I overheard, about the late-night calls, about the note I found in her jacket, about her obsessive insistence on taking this trip. I told them everything, every small detail that now, in retrospect, seemed like a warning sign. The detective took notes. Carmina listened in silence, nodding occasionally. When I finished, almost 2 hours had passed. I felt exhausted, empty, as if I had expelled everything from inside me, and now only a void remained. The detective closed his notebook. Thanks for your cooperation. This will help us a lot. Now I need you to know something important. You'll have to testify at the trial. You'll have to relive all this in front of a judge and jury. Are you prepared for that? I nodded. I'll do whatever's necessary to make them pay for what they did. Lilia and Rodrigo, both of them. The detective smiled slightly. I'm glad to hear that, because with your testimony and the evidence we have, they'll both spend a lot of time in prison. At that moment, another officer entered the room. He looked agitated. Detective, we have news. We arrested Rodrigo Medina. We found him at his home, trying to destroy evidence. He had documents, photos, bank records, all related to the victims. And we also found this. He handed the detective a metal box. The detective opened it. Inside were a phone, several fake identification documents in Lilia's name with different surnames and photos, and a notebook. The detective flipped through the notebook. His eyes widened in surprise. This is a detailed record of all their crimes, dates, names, methods, amounts of money obtained. It's as if they kept a diary of their murders. He showed me a page. I recognized my name at the bottom of the list. Sebastian Herrera. Farm valued at $350,000. Planned elimination date, today. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My name was there, written in black ink, as if it was just another item on a to-do list. Carmina looked at the notebook with sadness. Is my brother's name there? The detective nodded and showed her the page. Victor Salazar. Farm valued at $280,000. Method, fall into ravine. Date of elimination. Carmina closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. After 2 years of searching, she finally had definitive proof that her brother had been murdered. It wasn't an accident. It was a planned and executed cold-blooded murder. We spent the rest of the day at the police station. Detective Ramirez informed us that both Lilia and Rodrigo had been formally charged with multiple counts: conspiracy to commit murder, premeditated murder, fraud, falsification of documents, and sabotage. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The notebook with the record of their crimes, the intercepted conversations between them, the fake identification documents, the mechanic's testimony about the bus sabotage, and Carmina's and my testimonies. There was no way they could escape. The detective told us that both would be transferred to a maximum security prison while awaiting trial. I felt stunned. Everything had happened so fast. Just a few hours ago, I was on a bus with my wife, thinking we were going to visit a family property, and now I was at a police station discovering that the same wife had planned to murder me, that she had murdered my first wife, that my entire life over the past few years had been a carefully constructed lie. Carmina stayed with me the whole time. I don't know what I would have done without her. She was a stranger a few hours ago, but now I felt she was the only person in the world who truly understood what I was going through. She too had lost someone at Lilia's hands. She too had been deceived and manipulated indirectly. How did you know I was in danger? I asked her as we waited in the room. She took a sip of coffee they had brought us. I've been following Lilia for 2 years. I hired a private investigator who monitored her movements, her communications, everything. When we found out she had married again, I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried to do the same. I started investigating you too. Forgive me if that sounds invasive, but I needed to know if you were in real danger or if maybe this time it was different. I shook my head. Don't worry. I'm grateful you did. You saved my life. She smiled sadly. I only regret not being able to save my brother in time, or Mario, but at least I could save you, and that means something. Detective Ramirez returned to the room. I have more information. We've been reviewing Lilia and Rodrigo's finances. We discovered they have offshore bank accounts with approximately $1,200,000. That money comes from the properties they stole from their victims. Victor, Mario, and others were still identifying. Carmina tensed. Others? How many more victims are there? The detective looked at his notes. According to the notebook, at least 6. But we're investigating. Some of the cases are from more than 10 years ago. It'll take time to identify them all and contact their families. 6 victims, maybe more. 6 people who were manipulated, deceived, and murdered for money. 6 shattered families, and I almost became the 7th. I felt nauseous. I quickly got up and ran to the bathroom. I vomited everything I had in my stomach. Carmina came after me and rubbed my back as I recovered. It's okay, she said softly. It's normal to feel this way. It's a lot to process. When we returned to the room, the detective told us we could leave. We have everything we need for now. We'll let you know when we have a trial date. Meanwhile, Mr. Sebastian, I recommend you seek psychological help. What you've experienced today is traumatic. You need to process all this with a professional. I nodded. He was right. I couldn't just go on with my life as if nothing had happened. I needed help. Carmina offered to drive me back to the city. I accepted. I didn't have the strength to take a bus alone. During the drive, we spoke little. We were both physically and emotionally exhausted. She put on soft music on the radio. I looked out the window, watching the sun begin to set on the horizon. It was strange to think that this morning I believed my life was going in one direction, and now it was completely shattered. What are you going to do now? Carmina asked me after a long silence. I sighed. I don't know. I guess go home, although I no longer feel it's my home. Lilia lived there for 6 years. She touched all my things. She slept in my bed. Everything's contaminated with her presence. Carmina nodded. I understand. After what happened with Victor, I couldn't enter his house for months. It reminded me too much of him, and knowing that she was there, planning his death, made everything worse. I thought about my house, about all the memories I had there. First with Elena, then with Lilia. I think I'm going to sell it, I said suddenly. I can't keep living there. I need to start over in a place where there are no ghosts from the past. Carmina looked at me and smiled slightly. That sounds like a good idea. Sometimes starting over is the best thing we can do. We arrived in the city when it was already dark. Carmina dropped me off in front of my house. Before I got out, she gave me a piece of paper with her phone number. If you need to talk, or if you need anything, call me. You don't have to go through this alone. I thanked her and got out of the car. She waited until I entered the house before leaving. I closed the door behind me and stood in the entrance for a few minutes, looking around. Everything was just as we had left it that morning. Lilia's keys on the entrance table, her jacket hanging on the coat rack, her perfume still lingering in the air. I felt like I was drowning. I needed to get out of there. I went up to my room, grabbed a few things, and went to a hotel. I couldn't spend another night in that house. Not yet. The following weeks were a blur. I went to therapy as the detective had recommended. My therapist, a woman named Nyla, was patient and understanding. She helped me process everything that had happened. She helped me understand that none of this was my fault, that I had been a victim of manipulative and unscrupulous people, that trusting someone didn't make me weak or stupid. It was hard to believe her at first. I blamed myself for not having seen the signs, for having been so blind. But little by little, with her help, I began to accept that I couldn't have known that Lilia and Rodrigo were experts at what they did, that they had deceived many people before me. The trial began 3 months later. It was a long and painful process. I had to testify in front of Lilia and Rodrigo. I had to tell an entire jury how they had manipulated me, how they had murdered my first wife to get close to me, how they had planned my death with the same care with which one plans a vacation. Lilia looked at me throughout my testimony with that same cold expression I saw in her on the day of the arrest. There was no regret, no guilt, only indifference. Rodrigo, on the other hand, looked defeated. He knew there was no escape. The evidence was too clear. The notebook, the conversations, the testimonies of multiple witnesses, everything pointed to their guilt. Carmina also testified. She spoke about her brother Victor, about how Lilia had seduced and manipulated him, about how she had found his body in that ravine, about the 2 years she spent seeking justice. Her testimony was heartbreaking. Several jury members cried. Mario's relatives also testified. They told an almost identical story. A good, lonely, vulnerable man who met a charming woman who turned out to be his killer. The prosecutor presented evidence of at least 8 victims over 10 years, 8 lives taken by greed, 8 shattered families. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with the verdict, the entire room held its breath. Guilty on all counts. Lilia and Rodrigo were found guilty of multiple murder, conspiracy, fraud, and sabotage. The judge sentenced them to life in prison without possibility of parole. When I heard the sentence, I felt a mixture of emotions: relief because justice was finally done, sadness because none of this would bring back the victims, rage because Lilia and Rodrigo had destroyed so many lives without remorse, and a strange sense of emptiness, as if a chapter of my life was closing, but I didn't know how to start the next. After the trial, my life slowly began to change. I sold the house where I had lived with Elena and then with Lilia. I couldn't stay there. Every corner reminded me of one of them. Elena, the love I unfairly lost. Lilia, the lie that almost cost me my life. I bought a small apartment in another part of the city, a place where I could start anew without the weight of the past. Nyla, my therapist, told me it was a healthy decision, that I needed to create a new space where I could rebuild myself. And she was right. In that new apartment, little by little, I started to feel like myself again, or at least like a new version of myself. A more cautious version, yes, but also stronger. Carmina and I became close friends. We saw each other at least once a month for coffee and to talk. She understood my pain in a way no one else could. We had both been touched by Lilia's evil. We had both lost people we loved, and we were both trying to find a way to move on. She told me that after the trial, she was finally able to visit her brother Victor's grave without feeling that burning rage that had consumed her for years. Now she only felt sadness, a clean sadness, without the need for revenge. Justice doesn't bring back the dead, she told me one afternoon over coffee in a small downtown cafe. But at least it gives us peace of mind knowing that their killers won't hurt anyone else. The farm, that place that had been the center of all this tragedy. For months, I couldn't even think about it. The simple fact of remembering that Lilia had been taking me there to kill me caused me anxiety. But with time, and with Nyla's help, I began to see it differently. That farm had been my parents'. It had been the place of my childhood. It was full of beautiful memories that existed long before Lilia appeared in my life. I couldn't let her ruin that too. So one Saturday morning, 6 months after the trial, I took my car and drove there alone, without telling anyone. I needed to confront that place. The road was the same one I had traveled on the bus that day, but now I saw it with different eyes. There was no fear, no anxiety, only a kind of quiet determination. When I arrived at the farm, I stayed in the car for a few minutes, looking at the main house. It was neglected. The windows were dusty. The garden was overgrown with weeds. No one had taken care of that place in years. I got out of the car and slowly walked toward the entrance. I took out the keys I had kept at the bottom of a drawer for so long and opened the door. The interior smelled of decay, of abandonment, but there was also something familiar, something that immediately transported me back to my childhood. I could see my father sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper. I could hear my mother singing as she prepared breakfast. I could feel the warmth of that home that once was. I spent the whole afternoon there, cleaning, opening windows, letting in the fresh air. And as I worked, I felt something inside me heal. This place wasn't bad. This place wasn't to blame for what Lilia had planned to do here. This place was part of my history, part of my heritage, and I wasn't going to let her take it away from me. I decided then that I wouldn't sell the farm, at least not yet. Instead, I would restore it, turn it back into the home it once was. Maybe I wouldn't live there permanently, but it would be a place I could come to when I needed peace, a place where I could remember my parents without the pain of betrayal clouding those memories. Months passed. I hired a team to help me with the farm's repairs. We painted the walls, fixed the roof, mowed the garden, planted new flowers. And with each improvement, I felt that I wasn't just restoring the house, but also restoring myself. Carmina came to visit me one weekend. We walked around the property while I showed her all the progress. "It looks beautiful," she said with a smile. "Your parents would be proud." Her words filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Yes, my parents would be proud, not only of the farm, but of how I had survived, of how I had found the strength to move on despite everything. At work, there were also changes. My colleagues knew what had happened. The trial had been quite public. At first it was awkward. People looked at me with pity. Some avoided talking to me, probably not knowing what to say. But over time, things returned to normal. I was still good at my job. I was still the same professional I had always been, and eventually people stopped seeing me as the victim of an attempted murder and started seeing me simply as Sebastian the accountant. That relieved me. I didn't want my identity to be defined forever by what Lilia had done to me. A year after the trial, I received an unexpected call. It was Detective Ramirez. "Mr. Sebastian, I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to inform you that we've officially closed all cases related to Lilia Mendez and Rodrigo Medina. We identified all the victims, contacted all the families, and recovered most of the stolen money. It will be distributed among the legitimate heirs of the victims." I remained silent for a moment. "That means I'll receive the money Lilia stole from the planned sale of my farm?" The detective confirmed, "That's right. You'll receive compensation. It won't be everything, because some of the money has already been spent, but it will be a considerable amount." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't know how to feel about it. On one hand, that money had almost cost me my life. On the other hand, it was rightfully mine. I decided that when I received it, I would use it for something good. Perhaps a foundation to help victims of fraud and manipulation, or perhaps to finish restoring the farm and turn it into a retreat for people who had gone through similar traumas. I hadn't decided yet, but I knew I didn't want to keep it all for myself. I wanted something good to come out of all this pain. Carmina and I stayed in regular contact. She was also healing in her own way. She had gone back to work as a primary school teacher, something she had given up during the 2 years she spent obsessed with finding her brother's killer. "The children remind me there's goodness in the world," she told me once. "They remind me that not everyone's like Lilia and Rodrigo, that most people are good." Her words resonated with me because she was right. For a long time after the trial, I struggled to trust people. I saw manipulation everywhere. I questioned everyone's intentions, but slowly, with therapy and with the support of people like Carmina, I began to understand that I couldn't live like that not everyone was an enemy, that trusting again didn't make me weak, it made me human. I started going out more, socializing with old friends I had neglected during my marriage to Lilia. They welcomed me with open arms, asked how I was, listened to my story without judging me, and reminded me I had a support network that had been there all along, waiting for me to be ready to accept it. One of my friends, someone I had known since college, invited me to join a hiking group. "Fresh air and exercise will do you good," he told me. And he was right. Every Saturday we hiked different trails in the nearby mountains, and with each hike, I felt I was leaving behind a little more of the weight I had been carrying. I didn't get into a romantic relationship again. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be, and I was fine with that. I had learned I didn't need someone by my side to be happy, that I could build a fulfilling life on my own, but I didn't close that door completely either. Nyla had told me that someday, when I was truly healed, maybe I would feel the curiosity to open myself up to love again. And if that day came, it would come. I wasn't in a hurry. 2 years after that day on the bus, my life had completely changed. I was no longer the broken man who had left that police station. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece. The farm was completely restored. It was a beautiful place, once again full of life and color. I decided to convert part of it into a small refuge for people who had gone through traumatic situations similar to mine. I worked with Carmina to create a program where victims of fraud, manipulation, and violence could come and spend a few days in a peaceful environment, surrounded by nature, with access to therapy and emotional support. We named it Refugio Esperanza, Shelter Hope. It was a tribute to both Victor, Carmina's brother, and Elena, my first wife, and also to all those who had fallen victim to people like Lilia and Rodrigo. The inauguration of the refuge was emotional. Relatives of Lilia's other victims came, people who had lost their loved ones, and who now saw how something good arose from so much tragedy. Detective Ramirez was also present. He shook my hand firmly. "This is admirable, Mr. Sebastian, converting your pain into something that helps others. Not everyone has that strength." His words filled me with pride because he was right. It hadn't been easy to get here. There were days when I didn't want to get out of bed. Days when the rage and pain were so intense, I felt like they would drown me. But I chose to fight. I chose not to let Lilia and Rodrigo destroy what was left of my life. I chose to become a survivor, not a victim. Carmina gave a speech during the inauguration. She spoke about her brother Victor, about how he was a generous, kind man who always helped others. "Victor would have loved this place," she said with tears in her eyes. "He would have loved to know that his death wasn't in vain, that thanks to what happened, there's now a place where others can heal." Everyone applauded. I approached her after the speech and hugged her. No words were needed. We both knew what this place meant. It was a symbol of resistance, that evil doesn't always win, that even in the darkest circumstances, light can be found. The refuge began to receive its first guests a month later. They came from different parts of the country. Some had been victims of scams, others had survived abusive relationships. They all shared something in common. They needed a place to feel safe while they healed. I hired a team of professional therapists to work with them. There were also activities like yoga, meditation, nature walks, art therapy, all designed to help them reconnect with themselves. Seeing these people arrive broken and seeing them leave a little more complete each time reminded me why all this was worth it. Every smile, every tear of relief, every hug of gratitude confirmed that I had made the right decision. One day, I received a visit from a woman named Elsa. She was about 50 years old and had been a victim of a similar fraud to what Lilia attempted with me. Her partner had manipulated her for years, stolen her savings, and almost left her on the street. She came to the refuge because she had heard my story in the news and felt that maybe here she would find the peace she needed. She spent 2 weeks with us. At first, she barely spoke. She remained isolated, lost in her own thoughts. But little by little, with the therapy sessions and the environment of the refuge, she began to open up. One afternoon, she sought me out and asked to speak alone. We walked through the gardens while she told me her story. It was heartbreaking, but it was also inspiring because despite everything she had been through, she was still here, still fighting. "How do you do it?" she asked me. "How do you keep trusting people after what happened to you?" I stopped and looked at her. It was a question I'd asked myself many times. "I won't lie to you," I told her. "It was difficult. At first, I didn't trust anyone. I saw enemies everywhere, but I realized that living like that wasn't living. It was surviving in a constant state of fear. And Lillian didn't deserve to have that power over me. She didn't deserve to control my future, even from prison. So I decided that I wouldn't. I decided that I would trust again, but with more care, with more awareness, without losing my humanity in the process." Elsa nodded slowly. I could see that my words resonated with her. "Thank you," she said. I needed to hear that. 2 weeks later, when she left the refuge, she was a different person. She still had a long way to go, but now she had hope. And that was more than she had when she arrived. My relationship with Carmina became even closer. She wasn't just my friend. She had become someone essential in my life, someone who understood me completely without needing explanations. We worked together at the refuge. She was in charge of organizing the therapy programs while I handled the administrative part. We were a good team. One day, during one of our planning meetings, she looked at me with a serious expression. "Sebastian, there's something I need to tell you." I felt a slight knot in my stomach. Her tone worried me. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath. "I received a letter from Lilia." My world stopped. "What? Why would she write to you?" Carmina took an envelope from her purse. "I don't know, but I thought you should know. Maybe even read it." I took the envelope with trembling hands. It was addressed to Carmina, but inside there were 2 letters, one for her and one for me. "Did you read it?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, it's a kind of confession, or at least it seems like it. She says she's had time to think in prison, that she understands the harm she caused. She doesn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted us to know her side of the story." I didn't know if I wanted to read that letter. I didn't know if I was ready to hear what Lilia had to say after all this time. But Carmina put her hand over mine. "You don't have to read it now. You don't even have to read it ever if you don't want to. But it's there in case someday you feel you need to close that chapter completely." I put the letter in my pocket. I decided I would read it, but not today. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, or maybe never. I wasn't in a hurry. That night, in the solitude of my apartment, I took out the letter. I looked at it for a long time before opening it. Finally, I broke the seal. Lilia's handwriting was neat, almost elegant. It began by apologizing. She said she understood that no apology could erase what she had done, that she had destroyed lives out of greed and selfishness, that she deserved to be where she was. Then she explained her story, how she had grown up in extreme poverty, how she had suffered abuse as a child, how she had sworn she would never again be vulnerable, never again go hungry, never again depend on anyone. That this obsession with money and control had led her down a dark path from which she couldn't escape. She recounted how she met Rodrigo in a moment of desperation, how he proposed a plan to her, how at first she hesitated, but the first time it worked, it became easier and then easier, until she felt nothing, until the victims were just numbers, just targets, no longer people with families, with dreams, with complete lives ahead of them. It wasn't a justification. She herself said so in the letter. It was just an explanation, an attempt to make me understand how a person can come to do such horrible things. At the end of the letter, she wrote something that surprised me. "Sebastian, if there's anything good that came out of all this, it's that you survived. You were the only one who managed to escape. And I hope you find the happiness you deserve. A real happiness. Not the lie I offered you. I hope you can forgive yourself for having trusted me, because trusting isn't a weakness, it's courage. And I took advantage of that courage in the most cowardly way possible. I'm sorry. even though I know those words mean nothing coming from me. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I didn't know how to feel about it. I didn't forgive her. I probably never would. But at least now I could close that chapter with a sense of conclusion. I understood that Lilia was a broken person who had broken others, and that didn't excuse her, but it helped me let go of some of the hatred I had carried. The years kept passing. The refuge grew. We helped hundreds of people. Some returned years later to tell us how they had rebuilt their lives, how they had learned to trust again, how they had found love again, how they had forgiven not their aggressors, but themselves for having been victims. Those stories were what kept me motivated, what reminded me why I did what I did. Carmina and I continued to work together. Our friendship deepened over time. It never turned into anything romantic. Neither of us was looking for that. But we did have something special, a connection forged in the fire of shared tragedy and mutual healing. She became the family I chose, and I became hers. One Sunday afternoon, 3 years after the refuge's inauguration, I was sitting on the porch of the farm's main house. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Carmina sat beside me with 2 cups of coffee. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. I smiled. How far we've come. How something so terrible could turn into something so beautiful. She nodded. "Victor will be proud. Elena too." I took a sip of coffee. "I know, and I'm proud of us, of what we built, of how we didn't let evil win." We sat in silence, enjoying the sunset, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, a deep and real peace. I had survived, I had healed, and I had turned my pain into purpose. I thought about that day on the bus, how a simple whisper from a stranger had changed the course of my life, how Carmina had the courage to warn me despite not knowing me, how her determination to seek justice for her brother ended up saving me too. Life's strange that way. Sometimes the worst tragedies lead you to the best people. Sometimes pain teaches you lessons you never would have learned otherwise. I looked at Carmina. "You know what? I think I finally understand what it truly means to live." She looked at me with curiosity. "And what's that?" I thought for a moment before answering. Living isn't just surviving. It's not just going through the days hoping the pain will lessen. Living is choosing every day to get up and find something worth living for. It's turning your scars into wisdom. It's helping others with what you learn from your own wounds. That's living. Carmina smiled and raised her coffee cup. "To living, then?" I raised mine, and we toasted a living. The refuge would continue to grow. We would continue to help broken people find their way back to the light. And I would continue to honor Elena's memory, not with sadness, but with purpose, because she deserved to be remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived, with kindness, with love, with generosity, and I would make sure to live the same way. Not all endings are happy, but this one, in its own way, was because I had learned that true strength isn't in avoiding pain, but in what you do with it afterwards. And I chose to build, I chose to help, I chose to live. And that, in the end, was the best revenge against those who tried to destroy me. Because while they rotted in a cell, I was here, under the open sky, surrounded by people I cared about, making a real difference in the world. That was my victory, and no one could ever take it away from me.